Today on the countdown, we dare to explore curses from other cultures. First up is the fantastic follow-up to Joko Anwar's remake of Satan's Slaves. This is M.L. Miller Fright's Best in Horror Countdown 2022 through 2023. Counting down the best in horror within the window of October 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2023.
Number 5.
Satan's Slaves Communion was released on November 4th, 2022. It's streaming on Shudder. It was directed and written by Joko Anwar. Picking up just a short time after the events of the first Satan's Slaves, itself a remake of Satan's Slave from 1982, the three surviving children and their father move to an apartment high-rise in hopes to find some normalcy. But soon they find that the evil unleashed when their mother signed a pact with the devil long ago in order to attain fame and fertility has followed them there. In order to prepare myself for this sequel, I rewatched the 2017 film from Indonesian horror sensation Joko Anwar. I don't want to say it is required viewing, as I feel Satan's Slaves Communion does a decent job of summing up what occurs in the first film. But if you really want to get the full experience, you'll want to dive into both films. Much like Satan's Slaves, Anwar adopts a kitchen sink approach to his scares, inundating the viewer with one horrifying scene after another. Communion simply amps up the pressure to a fever's pitch much earlier in the story than its predecessor. The last hour of Communion, after a specific elevator scene, is a non-stop ride full of pants-filling scares and nightmares that will make you feel like you're a kid again. If you're looking for a film that is full of genuine and effective scares, Satan's Slaves Communion is it. What Anwar does so well is set the stage with likable and relatable characters. The three kids, Rini, played by Tara Basro, Tony, played by Endi Arfian, and Bondi, played by Nassar Anouz, are all likable and have grown a bit from the last film. But by having the kids age in real time only makes you feel like you've really grown up with these guys. All three have intriguing stories that are distinctly laid out in the narrative. Tony has a crush on an older woman in the building. Bondi deals with survivor's guilt from the original, but manages to be playful and make close friends despite all of that. Rini has dreams of going to school and leaving her family to study abroad, but feels responsible for raising her siblings, with her father, played by Bront Pilare, always away at work, and their mother dead from the last film. It's fun seeing how these kids have grown and seeing how the trauma from the last film affected their development. It's because I experienced sheer terror with these kids for 2 films now that I am so invested in these characters. Anwar develops these characters out of their love for one another, as well as the trauma that occurred. Each has grown in some way from the horrors they survived, some for the better, others for the worse, but it's all handled with sophistication and a strong attention to character. You just don't see that type of continuity these days, and while the comparisons are always going to be there, it is the reason why people loved the Freeling family from the Poltergeist movies and followed them from the first to the second film. The main difference is that Poltergeist 2 dipped in quality, while the sequel to Satan's Slaves kicked it up a notch and a half. While Anwar continues with much of the same rapid-fire scares technique that made Satan's Slaves so enjoyable, he takes full advantage of the new environment and gives each cast member such a compelling story on their own that I found myself preferring the sequel to the original. Moving the horror to a multi-leveled apartment building with endless corridors, flights of stairs, strange apartments, and all sorts of passages that are not meant to be ventured into makes for an amazing place to set a horror flick. I love it that Anwar fills every dark corner with a new and terrifying scare. Anwar also develops the story surrounding the cursed family and takes it to the next level. The film culminates with a strobe-lit ritual that is absolutely riveting. The film really opens up the mythology formed in the original and gives it a chance to breathe and evolve in this second film. Reminiscent of the machine gun-like delivery of comedy in the Airplane and Naked Gun movies, if one scare doesn't get you in Anwar's Satan's Slaves Communion, you needn't worry. Another one is on its way soon to make your whole body twitch and jump out of its seat. What impresses me is that so many scares occur and how different each one of them are. Some use strobe lights to build tension, others use sound, other scenes pan back and forth to amp up the suspense, while other scenes have things occurring in the foreground, while other things more insidious are going on in the background. Anwar truly uses every horror trick in the book to make this a potently scary movie from start to finish. Before I wrap things up, I wanted to make an observation about not just Satan's Slaves Communion, but a lot of international films that have been so successful lately. While religion is a taboo subject in so much of mainstream horror in America, I find it interesting that religious culture is such a fertile ground for horror in other countries. Sure, we have about one tepid exorcism movie release a year, but there really hasn't been a movie taking American religion to task since The Exorcist. But looking at as many international films as I have, it is interesting that so many of these films revolve around the religious practices and cultural beliefs of countries other than the U.S. One might write it off as other countries being more superstitious, but I think there's something deeper going on. These religious aspects, such as the way the dead are used in ceremony, is front and center in Satan's Slaves and its sequel. I think, had the film attempted to skirt around religion like American horror often does, it would have been much less effective. Just some food for thought, and I hope to delve deeper into this concept in future reviews. The closest current-day American counterpart I can think of for the Satan's Slaves movies is the Insidious franchise. But again, while James Wan's series fizzled after the first one, Satan's Slaves gets better and better. It even ends on somewhat of a cliffhanger, and I cannot wait to see what sort of terror Anwar has in store for us the next time. If you're a fan of international horror, or just horror in general, Satan's Slaves Communion shouldn't be missed. Next is a Dutch/Jewish drama about a Jewish curse and how it affects the relationship between two women. It's not your typical film, but if you stick with it, Attachment really delivers. Attachment, aka NATTEN Haar OJNE, was released on February 9th, 2023. It's streaming on Shudder. It's directed and written by Gabriel, Bier, Gislason. Maja, played by Josephine Park, is a Danish actress surviving on the inheritance she received after her mother's death and working in a library as a children's book reader for kids. It's there that she meets Leah, played by Ellie Kendrick, a Jewish student on her way back home for the holidays. The two fall hard for one another, and after Leah suffers an epileptic seizure, she hurts her leg and requires help to get back home. Maja jumps at the chance to follow Leah home to London, where she lives in a strict Jewish neighborhood. It's there that they meet Chana, played by Sophie Gabriel, Leah's very overprotective mother, who has strong superstitions about demons and the supernatural, especially inside of her home. As Maja and Leah settle in, Leah's condition becomes worse, and Maja begins to think that Chana's care is doing more harm than good. But what's really going on? And what does it have to do with a Dybbuk, an ancient spirit of Jewish lore that attaches itself to one's soul? So I struggled with adding Attachment to the main list of this countdown, although it's a high-caliber movie. The acting is superb from all three of the main players, delivering iconic performances that is a joy to see bounce off of one another. There's an ignorant argument that in order to get into a character's plight, one must see oneself represented in the story to do so. That's simply stupid. Attachment is proof positive that statement is false, as I am very far from being a Dutch or Jewish lesbian, but nevertheless, somehow I found myself enwrapped in their relationship and their well-being. This is because director-writer Gabriel Bier Gislason does such a fantastic job of fleshing out these interesting characters and taking the time to understand why they could and would fall in love so quickly. This getting to know you time can often be a boring jaunt in lesser horror movies, but because Josephine Park and Ellie Kendrick are so entertaining together, I never found myself bored 1 second during the first portion of this film. This first half hour succeeds in making one care about these two no matter what race, culture, or sexual preference they have, and that's why the rest of the movie, that gets pretty damn dark, works so well. Attachment is not only about how an evil spirit can attach itself to someone, it's about how one can attach oneself to another person in a relationship in an unhealthy way. This dysfunctional relationship is made real once Maja sees Chana's unhealthy attachment to her daughter, Leia. But it also begins to show up in the jealousy Maja forms as Chana's love seems to be a challenge to Maja's own relationship with Leia. Maja sees the subtle ways Chana manipulates Leia, but doesn't take this sitting down, as we find out Maja can manipulate all the same. This tug of war for Leia's affection and attention is the core conflict of the movie, with Maja and Chana on either side. The second half hour of the movie deals with Maja's realization of how bad the ties between mother and child really are. But attachment descends deeper into the abyss when the reasons behind Chana's obsessions are made light. When Maja writes off Chana's attention to Leia as simply an overprotective streak, strange things start occurring once Maja successfully drives a wedge between mother and daughter. Attachment attaches a supernatural angle to that very normal instance when the beginning of an intimate relationship challenges the dedication one has towards one's family. For Maja, it's easy. She has no family. But Leia is forced to choose between her mother and Maja, causing quite the emotional dilemma. Especially when neither Maja nor Chana fight fair and resort to some pretty devious and petty things to manipulate and retain Leia's love. The results are complex. It's an emotional conundrum, with Leia's love acting as the pawn everyone desires. There's an amazingly subtle sequence as Maja attempts to learn more about the Jewish culture by going into a bookstore in the community and meeting Leia's uncle Lev, played by David Densick. When Maja learns about a dybbuk, she says it's like a demon possessing a person. And it is, yet Lev also says it isn't. While the dybbuk has attached itself to Leia, the real threat is that the dybbuk has brought out the worst in those who care for her. So while the threat of the dybbuk is real, who it is threatening and who it is attached to is the real mystery of attachment. Still, attachment is mostly drama. There's a lot of suspenseful scenes, and things do get quite visceral towards the end when a ritual must be performed, but for the most part, attachment is a lesbian drama with supernatural elements, which is ultimately why it shows up in the worth noting section and not the main best of list. The horrors are subtle, but powerful, with super strong performances by the entire cast and a palpable sense of dread from start to finish. Attachment isn't your typical horror movie, but if you're prepared for heavy doses of drama, you might find yourself endeared with attachment. As always, feel free to agree, disagree, or how about you play along at home and give me your own picks for your favorite horror movies. It's October, so let's talk horror. Come back tomorrow for the next level in the Best in Horror Countdown. Be sure to hit all of those pertinent bells and whistles down below, and you'll never miss a post. Happy Halloween, folks.